There is a lesson hidden inside Stoicism that most people will never understand. Not because it's complicated, not because it's secret, but because the moment you truly understand it, you can no longer pretend to be the victim of your own life. It forces you to confront something uncomfortable, something most people spend years running from. And the strange thing is that the more you avoid it, the more power it gains over you. The Stoics knew this. Emperors knew this. Warriors knew this. Yet today, millions of people unknowingly surrender to it every single morning. What's even more shocking is that this lesson has nothing to do with becoming fearless. It has nothing to do with acting tough. In fact, some of the loudest, most confident people you see are often hiding the deepest weakness. The Stoics discovered a brutal truth about human nature that can either make you mentally unbreakable or leave you trapped in a prison you built yourself. And before this story ends, you'll understand why Marcus Aurelius believed that one hidden weakness could destroy a man's entire destiny. Before we continue, I want to know something. What city are you watching from right now? Leave it in the comments and answer this question honestly. What is your greatest weakness? Fear, anger, procrastination, self-doubt? Write it below. And if you believe, knowledge can change a life, leave a like and subscribe. Because if someone cannot show gratitude for a small opportunity to grow, how will they ever be grateful when life offers something greater? Now listen carefully, because this story begins nearly 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire stretched across continents. Its armies conquered nations. Its wealth was beyond imagination. Its power seemed unstoppable. And yet, sitting alone in a dimly lit room, illuminated by flickering oil lamps, the most powerful man in the world was fighting a battle no one else could see. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, a man who commanded armies, a man who ruled millions, a man whose words could alter the course of history. But every night before sleeping, Marcus wrote private notes to himself, notes that would later become one of the most influential books ever written, Meditations. And if you read those pages carefully, something surprising becomes clear. Marcus Aurelius was not writing about conquering enemies. He was writing about conquering himself. Think about that. The most powerful man on earth was not obsessed with controlling others. He was obsessed with controlling his own mind, because he understood something most people never learn. The greatest enemy rarely stands in front of you. The greatest enemy lives inside you, and it wears many masks. Sometimes it appears as fear, sometimes as laziness, sometimes as anger, sometimes as insecurity, and sometimes it disguises itself so well that you don't even recognize it. You call it comfort, you call it caution, you call it being realistic. But underneath those labels often hides the same thing. Weakness, not physical weakness, mental weakness, the kind that whispers excuses when life becomes difficult, the kind that convinces you to quit before you even begin, the kind that slowly steals years from your life while making you believe you still have time. Marcus understood this because he saw it everywhere, in politicians, in generals, in wealthy men, in ordinary citizens, and he noticed a pattern. People were not destroyed by circumstances. They were destroyed by their reactions to circumstances. One man loses money and rebuilds his fortune. Another loses money and collapses. One man faces rejection and grows stronger. Another faces rejection and gives up. One man experiences pain and develops wisdom. Another experiences pain and develops bitterness. The event is the same. The response is different, and that response changes everything. But here's where the story becomes even darker, because there was another Stoic who learned this lesson under conditions far worse than Marcus Aurelius. His name was Epictetus, and unlike the emperor, he was born a slave. Imagine waking up every morning, knowing your life belongs to someone else. Imagine having no freedom, no rights, no control over your future. Most people would break under those conditions, most people would spend their lives consumed by resentment. But Epictetus did something extraordinary. He began observing human behavior, not just the behavior of slaves, the behavior of masters, the behavior of soldiers, the behavior of wealthy citizens. And what he discovered shocked him. Many of the people who appeared powerful were actually prisoners, not prisoners of chains, prisoners of emotion, prisoners of fear, prisoners of approval, prisoners of desire. One man could not control his anger, another could not control his greed, another could not survive criticism, another lived in constant fear of losing status. They looked free, but they were trapped. And that's when Epictetus realized something that would become one of the most important lessons in Stoicism. The person who cannot control himself will always be controlled by something else. Pause for a moment. Think about how many people are controlled by their impulses. They know they should save money, but they spend. They know they should exercise, but they procrastinate. They know they should pursue their goals, but they wait, day after day, week after week, year after year, and eventually they wake up wondering where their life went. This is why the Stoics were so focused on self-mastery, because they knew freedom is not something you receive. Freedom is something you earn. And earning it requires confronting weakness directly, not hiding from it, not pretending it doesn't exist, confronting it. Most people do the opposite. They spend years building masks. They pretend to be confident, pretend to be successful, pretend to be happy, pretend to have everything figured out, but deep inside, they know something is wrong. And the more they hide it, the stronger it becomes. Imagine a crack in the foundation of a building. Ignore it long enough, and the entire structure eventually collapses. The same thing happens inside the mind. The fear you refuse to face grows larger. The insecurity you refuse to examine grows stronger. The habit you refuse to change gains control over your future. And one day, without warning, it costs you something valuable. Maybe a relationship, maybe an opportunity, maybe years of your life. But here's the truly terrifying part. The weakness that destroys most people is not obvious. It rarely announces itself. It usually arrives disguised as comfort, and comfort is dangerous. Not because comfort is evil, but because comfort slowly convinces you to stop growing. It tells you that tomorrow is fine, that next week is fine, that next year is fine, and before you know it, entire decades have disappeared. Seneca understood this better than almost anyone. Unlike Epictetus, Seneca was incredibly wealthy. He possessed influence, status, power, everything society associates with success. Yet despite having enormous wealth, he practiced voluntary discomfort. He slept on hard surfaces, wore simple clothes, ate plain meals. People thought he was insane. Why would a rich man choose discomfort? Because Seneca was preparing for something most people never prepare for: loss. He knew fortunes could disappear, he knew circumstances could change, he knew life was unpredictable, and he wanted to make sure his happiness was never dependent on comfort. That's a lesson modern society desperately needs, because today people panic when they lose convenience. They panic when things become difficult. They panic when life refuses to follow their plans. But the Stoics trained for uncertainty, and because they trained for it, they became stronger than it. Yet there is one final weakness. One weakness more dangerous than fear, more dangerous than laziness, more dangerous than failure. A weakness so common that millions of people feed it every single day without realizing it. And once you see it, you'll understand why so many dreams die before they ever become reality. Because this weakness doesn't destroy you all at once. It destroys you slowly, quietly, one decision at a time. And in the next part of this story, you'll discover exactly what it is, and why the Stoics believed it was the ultimate obstacle standing between a person and their highest potential. The weakness the Stoics feared most was not fear itself, it was dependence. dependence on comfort, dependence on approval, dependence on circumstances, dependence on outcomes. Because the moment your happiness depends on something outside your control, you hand your freedom away. Think about how many people are controlled by the opinions of strangers. One negative comment ruins their day. One rejection destroys their confidence. One failure convinces them to quit. It's as if their emotional life is being controlled by whoever happens to be standing nearby. The Stoics looked at this and saw tragedy because they understood something most people never realize. If someone else can control your emotions, they control your life, and that realization changes everything. Imagine a man standing in the middle of a storm. The wind is violent. The rain is relentless. Thunder shakes the sky. Most people would focus on stopping the storm. The Stoics focused on becoming strong enough to stand inside it. That is the difference. One approach tries to control the world. The other learns to control itself. And that distinction is where true power begins. But life has a way of testing every philosophy. Sooner or later, everyone faces a moment that reveals who they truly are. For Marcus Aurelius, those moments arrived repeatedly. Wars erupted across the empire. Plagues spread through cities. People died by the thousands. Trusted allies betrayed him. Enemies surrounded him. Every day brought uncertainty. Every day brought pressure. Every day brought fear. Yet somehow he continued. Not because he never felt pain, not because he never felt doubt, but because he understood that emotions are visitors, not masters. Fear can enter the room, but it doesn't get to take the throne. Anger can knock on the door, but it doesn't get to make decisions. Anxiety can appear, but it doesn't get to choose your future. This idea sounds simple, but if you master it, your entire life changes, because most people obey every emotion they feel. They feel tired, so they quit. They feel scared, so they avoid action. They feel uncertain, so they stay stuck. They feel discouraged, so they abandon their goals. And years later, they wonder why nothing changed. The answer is brutal, because their emotions were driving the vehicle, and emotions make terrible leaders. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine waking up without motivation and working anyway. Imagine feeling fear and moving forward anyway. Imagine feeling doubt and continuing anyway. Imagine feeling exhausted and remaining disciplined anyway. That is where transformation happens. Not when things are easy, not when conditions are perfect, but when every excuse is available and you still choose action. And this brings us to one of the darkest truths in Stoicism. Life does not care about your excuses. That sounds harsh, because it is. The universe does not reward intentions. It rewards actions. Millions of people intend to become successful. Millions intend to become healthier. Millions intend to build better lives. But intention without action changes nothing. And the Stoics understood this better than anyone. They believe character is not revealed by what you say. Character is revealed by what you repeatedly do. Every habit becomes a vote. Every decision becomes a vote. Every action becomes a vote. You are constantly voting for the person you are becoming. The frightening part? Most people are voting against themselves without realizing it. One excuse at a time, one delay at a time, one compromise at a time, and slowly their future begins to reflect those decisions. But there is something even more dangerous. Something hidden beneath all weakness, something that destroys more dreams than failure ever could. The fear of being uncomfortable. Modern society has trained people to avoid discomfort at all costs. Everything is designed to be easier, faster, more convenient, more comfortable, yet every meaningful achievement requires the opposite. Growth requires discomfort. Discipline requires discomfort. Success requires discomfort. Wisdom requires discomfort. Strength requires discomfort. And this is why so many people remain trapped. They want the rewards without the process, the victory without the struggle, the results without the sacrifice. But life doesn't work that way. A seed must break before it becomes a tree. Steel must face fire before it becomes strong. And a human being must face difficulty before becoming resilient. The Stoics never asked how to avoid hardship. They asked how to use hardship. That difference is enormous. Most people see obstacles and retreat. The Stoics saw obstacles and trained. Most people saw pain and complained. The Stoics saw pain and learned. Most people saw setbacks and quit. The Stoics saw setbacks and adapted, and this mindset transformed ordinary men into extraordinary ones. But now comes the most important lesson of all, the lesson hidden underneath every other lesson, the lesson that ties everything together. The reason weakness becomes dangerous is not because weakness exists. Every human being has weaknesses. The danger begins when weakness remains unconscious, when you refuse to acknowledge it, when you hide it, when you blame others for it, when you build your life around protecting it. Because whatever remains unconscious controls you from the shadows. The man who refuses to admit his insecurity becomes controlled by approval. The man who refuses to admit his fear becomes controlled by avoidance. The man who refuses to admit his anger becomes controlled by rage. The man who refuses to admit his laziness becomes controlled by stagnation. And suddenly years pass, opportunities disappear, potential fades, not because life was unfair, but because the enemy was never confronted. The Stoics demanded radical honesty, not with other people, with yourself, the ability to look directly at your flaws, your fears, your weaknesses, and say, yes, this is part of me. Not to hate yourself, not to shame yourself, but to finally take responsibility for your own growth. Because once weakness is exposed, it loses power. A monster hidden in darkness seems terrifying. A monster standing in the light becomes manageable. That is what self-awareness does. It turns invisible enemies into visible challenges, and visible challenges can be overcome. Think about the strongest people you've ever met. Not the loudest, not the richest, not the most famous, the strongest. The people who remain calm under pressure. The people who endure hardship without collapsing. The people who continue moving forward when everyone else gives up. Those people are not strong because they lack weakness. They are strong because they understand it. They have studied it, faced it, confronted it, and slowly transformed it. That is why Stoicism remains powerful after 2,000 years. Because human nature has not changed. People still fear rejection, still fear failure, still fear uncertainty, still hide from themselves. And yet the solution remains the same. Stop running, stop hiding, stop pretending, face reality, face yourself, face your weaknesses. Because on the other side of that confrontation is freedom. And perhaps that is the most brutal lesson of Stoicism. The thing holding most people back is not the world. It is not luck. It is not circumstances. It is not other people. It is the weakness they refuse to confront, the weakness they protect, the weakness they feed. The weakness they pretend doesn't exist. And the moment they finally face it, everything begins to change. So tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself one question. What weakness has been quietly controlling my life? Don't answer quickly. Be honest. Because your answer may reveal the very thing standing between you and the person you could become. Marcus Aurelius spent his life fighting that battle. Epictetus built his philosophy around that battle. Seneca warned people about that battle. And now it becomes yours, not tomorrow, not next week, today, because life moves faster than you think. Years disappear, opportunities vanish, time never negotiates, and one day you will either look back with pride or with regret. The choice begins now. Not when conditions are perfect, not when motivation arrives, not when fear disappears. Now face the weakness, step into the discomfort. Take control of your mind, because the moment you stop running from yourself is the moment you become truly dangerous to every obstacle standing in your way. And that is the moment an ordinary person begins to become unbreakable. If you're ready to discover the Stoic truths that most people are too afraid to hear, watch the next video on your screen right now.